Hello everyone, Britt here from Scrappy Stamps, and today we're going to do a tutorial for the vintage car. There are assembly instructions on the back of the packaging for this die, so feel free to follow along if you already have it in your hands. Now let's cut our pieces. You'll cut the base layer of the car one time, the first layer of the car body one time, and the second layer of the car body one time. There's a racing stripe with tiny pin dot details. For this example, I cut it one time, and then I cut the smaller details. The tire and tire wall should be run through twice per tire, and the frame piece for the windows should be cut once. The remaining 3 dies all have small accents, and each cut multiple pieces. The small die with 3 pieces should be cut twice to finish the wheels. The small die with the triangle should be cut twice to get 2 colors. Finally, the remaining small die should be cut twice to accommodate 2 colors. Now that we've cut all the pieces, we'll start the assembly in a moment, but I wanted to explain an additional piece that I created for this tutorial. I wanted to add panes of glass for the windows. So using the window frame die as a template, I cut a piece of acetate to fit. This is an easy shape to hand cut, and it really helped my final design. Now that we have all of the pieces that we need to create the car, we'll add a little bit of interest and depth with some stenciling before we start to put everything together. In the past, I've shown a few tools that you can use to stabilize your project while you stencil. And in this video, I wanted to show this Brutus Monroe stick and stamp mat because it's a lower cost alternative I've been loving lately, especially with the blending buddy on top, which helps keep the mat cleaner for longer. So I pulled out my favorite Scrappy Stamps stencil, the cracks background, because our little car is going to go on a Halloween themed project, and I wanted the look of the car to be a little worse for wear. I also wanted to mention I've been loving this Simon Says Stamp ink cube holder. I use a lot of mini ink cubes, and this holds them so I don't have to chase them around my desk. For this first layer of the car, only the top will show, so I'm only inking up the roof of this piece. As you can see, it sort of gives the impression that the car is dinged up and that the paint job has seen better days. To give the top layer the same look, I'm going to replace it on my stick and stamp mat. And again, I'll use the cracks background and my black ink, this time making sure the pattern covers the entire piece. I checked how the 2 pieces looked layered up and decided that it needed a little bit of inking around the outside in order to give it some more definition. When I make these videos, I go back and forth between wanting to cut out some of the work. For example, in the past, I might have cut this portion so that you didn't have to see me do all of the inking. This time I left it in to see how you like it. So let me know in the comments. Do you enjoy a shorter video where things like this are cut out? Or would you rather stick with it and see as much of the process as possible? I also decided to try out a little bit of a different glue for this project. It's called Artiste glue from scrapbook.com. I really like that it comes with multiple tips and a pin for cleaning. Okay, so my first top tip for putting together this design is to make sure that you have some tools on hand to make the small pieces easy to apply. We're also going to approach this the opposite way that we usually do. And by that I mean that it works best to add all of these small details before you attach the body of the car. The back bumper is comprised of 2 pieces. The larger piece fits perfectly on the bottom left of the base, and the smaller piece has one side that curves out and the other side that curves in. You'll layer it over the bottom half of the larger piece with the inward-facing curve to the left. Trust me, it's pretty obvious if you've put it on backwards. And as you can see, the whole process does go a little bit smoother with a small hand tool like a reverse tweezers. Next, we'll attach the front bumper. Similar to the large piece in the back, this piece has a little place where it fits exactly onto the base at the front of the car. Now, I've already placed the back wheel because it also has a perfect place to fit, but the front wheel hangs off of the design just a little. A good tip for this one is to make sure you only put glue where it will actually stick to the base. You'll place it to the left of the front bumper, leaving maybe a centimeter of space between the bumper and the front of the wheel. I checked to make sure the wheels were even, and then I moved on to the smaller details. To finish off your wheels, you'll need the 2 smallest circles put in the middle of each wheel to function as hubcaps. I cut mine in silver, but feel free to use any metallic. Old cars were very creative with their color choices. Then once the hubcaps are in place, the last thing is the white wall for each tire. I know it might seem like putting the middle in and then going back and putting the white wall on is out of order, but I tried it both ways and I feel like it's easier to center things if I put the hubcap on first. White wall tires are also very stylized and vintage, so if you're trying to update this car for a specific design, you could also leave these off completely. Once you have both bumpers and both tires completed, now you can go to the body of the car and start layering that. In case you're curious about the paper that I'm using, I cut this from a background that I made when I was just experimenting with the new Distress Britt sprays. If you liked the seasonal mica sprays that have been coming out in the past, I would highly recommend these. They are super shiny and I love the texture I was able to create. As you can see, the first layer of the body fits directly over the base piece. And here you can see the body overlaps the wheels and the bumpers, which is why we had to put them on first. On top of that, we'll put the second layer of the body, which I'm layering flat, but you could add foam adhesive to this piece if you wanted to add a little more dimension. Next, I want to add probably my favorite detail of this particular die set, the racing stripe. Again, this is an optional piece. You could definitely leave it off if you wanted to update the look of the car. And to help you with placement, there is a little bit of a notch at the front of the car. If you butt the end of the strip up against that notch, it will lay perfectly every time. Next, we're going to place the 3 tiniest pieces in this die set. I believe that the car in this set was inspired by the Chevys of the 1950s. It looks like sort of a hybrid between a Chevy Bel Air and a Chevy Impala. These 3 little hash marks that go near the front of the hood, those were more a characteristic of the Bel Air. So if you omit them, you basically have an Impala. Details like this did actually appear on other model and makes of cars. For example, if you were to move those back a little bit and alter the racing stripe, you could have a Buick Riviera. So my real tip for stretching this particular die set is to go on the internet and look up the vintage cars of the 50s and 60s. It's a detail that would be especially impressive if you were giving the card to a person who loved vintage cars. At this point, it's time to add the window and the window frames. If you remember from the beginning, I cut an extra piece to represent the actual window panes in these windows. I did zoom this part in, but as you can see, clear acetate is just a little hard to see on camera. I attached the frame for the windows so they were hanging off of the top of the acetate. That way, the windows looked slightly rolled down. I also wanted them to look spooky and completely busted, so I cut in some ragged, broken off pieces at the top of each window. Then I tried to darken them with a little bit of ink, but it really wasn't giving me the contrast I was looking for. So I used a black marker to emphasize those jagged edges at the top of each window. This is good for now, but I end up making it a little darker later. I'm going to attach it using a little bit of liquid glue, and normally I would really try to stay away from the acetate with any glue, but that's one of the things I love about spooky Halloween junker cars. The less perfect it looked, the better. Whether you add in the window panes or not, this piece can be a little confusing at first. Just make sure the 3 little points at the bottom line up with the bottom half of the body because they would be attached to the doors below, not the roof above. It'll have just the tiniest space above it, and here you see me adjusting mine for that. Once I have that in place, I'll go in and add a little more shadow to my window panes so that they're more visible. At this point, you'll have a couple little pieces left. You'll have 2 little L-shape or checkmark pieces. The smaller of those 2 pieces is not optional because it denotes the front windshield. Here is a do what I say and not what I do moment. I put mine a little too close to the window frame. It really should be separated just slightly. But at the end of the day, it's paper, people. Relax. These last 2 pieces give you a really cool option. This creates a little detail on the back of the roof called a landau top. The first landau tops were actually from the 20s and 30s, but it was repopularized in the late 60s. So the models that are most likely to have these are called the Chevrolet Caprice and Monte Carlo. Make sure you cut this little triangle piece in a contrasting darker or lighter color. It'll look more realistic that way because landau tops were made to stand out. And with that, our villainous vehicle is ready for the road. Now the tutorial stops there, but I wanted to share some stenciling and scene building tips, starting with this forest scene builder stencil from Scrappy Boy Stamps. Now one of the things I love about stencils is how easy it is to flip it and reverse it and be able to orient your design any way you want. As you can see, our little vintage car fits better into the design if I orient the road this way. I did also want to mention, I'm going to show here you can just use low-tack tape to stabilize your stencils. Don't get me wrong, the stick and stamp mat and things like the stamp and stencil tool really are amazing to have. But especially if you're just starting out, low-tack tape is great to start with until you've decided if that's an investment that you want to make. Besides, you need the money for all the stencil stamps and dies that you're going to get from Scrappy Boy anyway, right? You've got priorities. The other thing I love about stencils is how easy it is to mask off anything you don't want to use. For example, all I needed for the project I'm making is this road, so I just simply masked off all of the tree stumps so that when I ink the stencil up, only the road will show. That means this can be a road or a path in any environment where I want to put it. The truth is, this is going to be a pretty simple application of this particular stencil. I wanted a windy street that looks like it was made of asphalt so that a car could drive on it. The other thing that scene builder stencils in particular can do for you, which this one does very well, is help you create depth of field in your scene. Because of the way this path is designed, it tricks our eye into seeing the thin part at the top as far away and the wider, thicker part at the bottom as closer to us. Adding just one element in your scene that is designed this way will influence how you can use perspective throughout the rest of the card building process and can help you unite elements that might not be scaled to necessarily fit well together. As you can see, I'm also inking certain sections darker than others. I'm purposely being more heavy-handed on the outside of the design paying special attention to the inside of every curve. I also did my first layer in gray ink and then reinforced the darkest areas with black. Once I was satisfied that I had gotten the look I was going for, I of course wanted to show you the best part of any stenciling, the reveal. I did want to assure you that that little spot on the right-hand side is not because of the stenciling that I did. You might remember when I added black ink to the window panes earlier. Unfortunately, I wasn't paying attention, and that was on top of the card panel that I had already cut. Ultimately, I knew the design was going to cover it up, so it was no big deal, but just FYI, that was not a stenciling mistake. As you can see here, I'm using a 4-inch roll of low-tack tape in order to create a stencil that I can use that will accompany this roadway I've already added. That way, instead of my road just going off into nowhere, by giving the scene a skyline, it enables our brain to fill in the rest of the picture so we know the road doesn't end there. It's just too far away to see. How you ink things and the colors that you choose also can help you create a little more of that depth of field. As you can see, I very nearly started with the larger brush and the darker ink, but I'm glad I changed direction because it allowed me a lot more control. It is much easier to make things darker than it is to lighten them up. Sort of like salt in a recipe. You can always add more, but you can't really take it away once it's in there. For this scene, I knew I wanted to make it look like an evening sky. And because the sun, the source of our light, is going down, things that are near the horizon line, which is closer to the sun and farther away from us, will be brighter, while the things that are farther away from the sun and closer to us will often be darker. So I started with my lighter color of green at the horizon line and blended it down about halfway. Then I'll bring the darker of the two greens in, start from the bottom, and blend up until I meet the lighter shade. Now I'm using distress inks here, and sometimes two shades of the same color can look very similar, but because this formula is translucent, it's often necessary to build these darker colors up in order to get that true deep shade. And yes, you can build up the lighter colors, but you'll eventually hit a threshold and you won't be able to darken that color anymore. So while it isn't necessary to have every shade of every color, it is often easier to create these effects if you have at least one light and one dark of the shades you most often use. I don't mean to be an enabler, but if there's an excuse to get more ink, I'm probably going to use it. Wasn't that reveal amazing? Now, if you're creating a mask like this one, don't throw away the part that you cut off. You can use that to perfectly mask off the part you just inked so you can protect your work while we make our sky. Taking into account the technique we use to create depth on the ground, we're going to use that same logic for the sky, but in reverse. Again, we will need a lighter and a darker color of ink. And for anything resembling a night sky or twilight, I usually like to use a color and black. The only difference is that this time we're going to start with the lighter color toward the horizon line, which is at the bottom, and we'll fade up into the darker color at the top. The reason that it's flipped is that horizon line is still getting the most light. And when it comes to the sky, that line is at the bottom. And the further you get from that line, the more you lose the light. I'd really like to know if you like videos like this, where we go a little more in depth on certain techniques. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you have other ideas of what you'd like to see, comment below and let me know what they are. And finally, look at that peel and reveal. Oh, it's my favorite part. Now I am going to use some black ink to close up this little gap at the bottom. And then I realized that maybe the entire panel could use a little bit of vignette shadowing all the way around it. Adding a little bit of a darker shadow around the outside helps draw your eye to the middle of the scene. Now that our background panel is done, let's create some additional embellishments and put everything together. Along with the car and a bunch of other fun releases from this month is the Jukebox mini album die. And although this video doesn't use any of the other pieces, one of the pieces from that die set makes a perfect little tombstone. But if you don't have that die set, no worries. Whatever shape you have will work just fine. I used the Cracks background stencil to make the two lighter colored tombstones look aged. Then I just pulled out some letter stickers, old ones from my stash, because I wanted each tombstone to look a little different. I even decided that I was going to letter one of them by hand. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to do this was because I know that there are a lot of people out there, even people who are really creative, who don't like their own handwriting. And trust me when I say I'm definitely someone who understands the need to be perfect. But I'm also here to advocate that perfect cards can be bought at a store. Am I really great at hand lettering? No, not really. I am pretty average, actually. Do I always love my handwriting? Again, no, I don't always love it. And did I write out this entire name, get to the end, and then say, that could have been a lot more centered? Yep, 100%. I did absolutely have that thought. And the thing is, I could have removed this from the video, started over, and done something that was a lot closer to perfect. But at the end of the day, I made this out of pieces of paper. And if your handmade thing looks a little bit handmade, that, in my opinion, is better than perfect. In the end, I was glad that I went with my own handwriting, and I'm glad I stuck with my first attempt. Now, we are approximately 5 minutes away from the end of this video, and for the next 2 of those minutes, I'm going to show you how I took 2 rectangles, 1 strip black paper, and a few die cuts from this die set and created a billboard for our scene card. You just saw me put a little black ink around that small rectangle, and now I'm going to cut a little strip of black paper about 1/4 of an inch wide. Then I'm going to trim that strip so it's the same length as the small rectangle. Both end up being approximately 3 inches. Then you're going to go to your vintage card die set, grab the piece that cuts the tiny triangle, and cut it 4 times. I knew there needed to be a see-through gap between the rectangle and the black strip, but I also wanted the finished piece to be sturdy. So I cut a small piece of acetate and attached both the rectangle and the black strip to the acetate. It's a little hard to see against my desk, but in the finished product, it's really obvious. Once those 2 pieces were secured by the acetate, I used the 4 little triangles from our vintage card die set and repurposed them as spotlights for our billboard. I have to tell you, this little cheat worked so well, I was amazed when I got finished with it. Not only were these triangles the perfect size to represent those can spotlights, but adding the acetate allowed me to create a visual trick. In the final project, the illusion is that the entire thing is being held together by those 4 little triangles, when really the acetate, which is basically invisible, is actually doing all the heavy lifting. To finish this up, I used just another plain piece of black cardstock cut into a small rectangle. This will serve as the pole that holds the billboard up off the ground. Finally, to finish off the billboard, do you remember those little checkmark shapes that cut with the triangles? That's right, we're going to use those too. Most billboards are accessed by ladders that go up the outside of the pole. Since I already had the pieces cut, I just stacked up those little check marks so they look like a ladder. Unfortunately, I did lose a little bit of footage right at the end of this process, but thankfully it was only a little inking to add some glow to the lights, and then finally adding part of my sentiment. It is a weakness of mine to add stars to anything I can justify adding stars to. And the stars on this Cinderella Scene Builder stencil plus the Sizzix Luster Wax are pretty much a match made in heaven. This wax is some of the best of this type of product that I have ever used. And although there are some applications in which using your finger is actually the best course of action, I've been really enjoying using the tiny blending brushes that are new from Tim Holtz this year. For stenciling, these little blending brushes pick up exactly the right amount of product. The luster wax doesn't dry up or ruin the blending foams, and I've been able to use them over and over. The one thing I will say is that luster wax does have a staying powder, particularly on your stencils. So if you do try luster wax with your stencils, I definitely would wash it off right away, and you're probably going to need some rubbing alcohol. All right, we are in the home stretch. Let's put everything together. So the inspiration for this card came from a couple of different sources. Number 1, my love for Halloween, my absolute favorite holiday, and probably my favorite time of year to create for, period. Second, my love for Halloween naturally feeds into my love for all Halloween products. So it's a surprise to no one that I am in love with these Halloween pinups from last year's Halloween collections. It's an understatement for me to say that you will absolutely be seeing these again. There are also 2 bundles of this collection that are available at a discount right now. You can choose from either just the stamps and outline dies, or you can get the core bundle, which includes pattern papers and a scene builder stencil. But over and above my love for Halloween and these particular stamps, when I saw this new vintage card die set, I was inspired to do something I have been thinking about a little more lately. And that's including pop culture references, particularly things that I'm nostalgic for, like movies that came out when I was a teenager. If you're somewhere around my age, I am an elder millennial, you were probably a teenager around the time the original Mean Girls movie came out. And one of the most quotable lines from the entire movie happens to be, "Get in, loser, we're going shopping." And since I had a car and some little pinup girls that could definitely be our scary little mean girls, once I had "Get in, loser, we're going haunting" in my head, I had to make it. And no, you're not seeing seeing things, I did actually mess with those windows one more time. But in my defense, they did actually look better after this third time. So, once I was done with that last minute edit, we are done. This little vintage car is also part of the Summer Fling collection, which just came out from Scrappy Boy Stamps. I was obsessed with the inspiration behind this collection when I was a little kid. I know you're not supposed to put baby in a corner, but this design sort of called for it, so as long as you don't tell Johnny, neither will I. If you have made it this far, my longest Scrappy Boy video to date, I thank you so much for sticking with me. We love our little crafty community, and we could not do this without you. If you want to join in the fun, go to the description box below, and you will find links to the Scrappy Boy Facebook page and Instagram account. There you'll find updates, news, and new releases, as well as inspiration from our amazing design team, and an opportunity for you to share your creations with us as well. You'll also find a link to scrappyboy.com, where you can find all of these stamps, stencils, and dies featured in this video, as well as a whole lot more. You will also find links to everywhere you can find me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and comment down below. And don't forget to give the Scrappy Boy YouTube channel a follow, as well as hitting that notification bell so you know whenever we upload new videos. And as always, if you learn nothing else today, let it be this. If someone were to try to measure my love for Halloween, you could reasonably say the limit does not exist. See you next time. Bye.